Nomadism has become the new norm. We heard it this morning. The media confront us almost every day with a growing number of refugees caused by lack of opportunity, brutality and climate change in their home countries, and migrants driven by the urge of finding a better future. The Venice Biennale reports this year From the Front, examining architecture as an instrument for social and political life, and the Oslo Architecture Triennale that opens this Thursday searches what it means to be at home, with the evocative title After Belonging. One might think that the issue is brand new and needs a whole new set of instruments and tools and theories to grasp what we, architects and urban planners, are trying to get involved in. This is, of course, not entirely true. I want to show you today that we can learn from recent architectural history, and in particular from two projects made in the 1960s. The first one is La Ville Spatiale, a project developed by the Hungarian-born architect and urban planner Jona Friedman. And the second, New Babylon, a project developed by the Dutch artist Constant Nieuwenhuis in the 1960s. Both projects started in 1956, so exactly 60 years ago. Both projects have taken up diverse forms: models, drawings, collages, texts, exhibitions, books, etc. And they have been acquired recently by important art institutions. The Getty Institute in Los Angeles for the work of Jona Friedman, and the Gemeentemuseum in Den Haag for the work of Constant. But both projects also belong to the category of paper architecture, meaning that they were never realized beyond their paper form. What is left of these projects today? Are they only theoretical? Are they only utopian? The mere result of naive optimism of the 60s? Or might they be relevant to our present state of emergency? Jona Friedman was born in 1923 in Budapest and still is alive. He lives today in Paris at the age of 93. Since the early 50s, Friedman has been questioning the relationship between architecture and the social sciences, the arts and social organization. Yeah, we can see him here in a photo montage that he made himself with his dog Balkis, who died in the meantime. He starts to formulate his principles in a period immediately following the Second World War, a period in which responses had to be found to major reconstruction issues such as the acute housing shortages, economic recovery, and urban and administrative replanning and reorganization in France. It is in this context of an unbridled urbanization and economic, social, and cultural mutation that Friedman is confronted in Paris with the consequence of large-scale migration. At that time, around Paris, in cities like Nanterre and Noisy-le-Grand, Algerian immigrant workers had settled down in order to find a better future for their children. The inhumane circumstances of their habitat resembles in more than one way to what we see today in Calais jungle in the north of France. Visionary Friedman reacts. After researching prefab materials in an attempt to address housing shortages, he confects his first major theory, l'architecture mobile, a plea for modular and self-planned architecture, ensuring, and this is important, social mobility. He presents his ideas at the 10th International Congress of Modern Architecture in Dubrovnik in 1956, where he attacks the CM members and declares, and I quote, "Buildings should be mobile, and the user, not the architect, should decide their arrangement." Of course, his theory is detested. He is declared utopian and naive, but in all his stubbornness, he continues, founds in 1957 the Groupe d'études d'architecture mobile, the Mobile Architecture Research Group, and publishes 1 year later a small booklet, which you see on the left, printed at 300 copies at first and edited later on again and again and again, L'architecture mobile. In it, Friedman describes an architecture available for a mobile society. It is the habitat chosen by the inhabitants by ways of infrastructure that are neither determined nor determining. Criticizing the classical architect who invented the average man and ignored the needs of the actual members of society, Friedman urged to strip down architecture from its authority and bend it towards the occupants. In an interview I had with him in 2008 in his house in Paris, he confined me, "Only accidents are important in architecture. When I was very young," he said, I thought very positively about modern architecture. Then came the Second World War, and I'm practically a product of this war. Indeed, Friedman joined the resistance during the Nazi occupation of Budapest and was informed to and detained. The Soviets arrived, Budapest was liberated, and he left Hungary, moving first to Bucharest and then to Israel. The war revealed cities to him as survival tools, cities that, to fulfill their function, had to be adaptable. Building upon his mobile architecture, he develops between 1959 and 1960 La Ville Spatiale, or the spatial city. A spatial, three-dimensional structure raised upon piles, a city over the city with existing blocks or underused urban spaces, for instance, railroad tracks, ports, parks, parking lots, and bridges, which are underneath. A city hollowed out with different kinds of mobile units related in a grid. And you see here one of the first models that he made to represent this infrastructure, this grid. The infrastructure is split in two, so that supporting structures store the utilities, while containers in between house individual prefab units. The units can be stacked on top of each other and designed by their inhabitants. As the structures are supported by tall columns, they have little impact on the ground, as we can see here on one of the models. Cities can therefore continue to grow without any increase in land area or demolition of existing buildings. The lower level is earmarked for public life and for premises designed for community services, as well as pedestrian areas. The piles contain vertical circulation, transport, lifts, staircases, and the space in the grid are rectangular and habitable modular voids with an average of 25 square meters. The superposition of the levels makes it possible to assemble then an industrial city, a residential city, and even a commercial city on the same site. Hence the project constitutes what Jonas Friedman called an artificial topography, a framework, which we can clearly see on the models, suspended in space that outlines a new mapping of the territory by means of a homogeneous, continuous, indeterminate network. And within this megastructure, the modular fabric offers the city the perspective of unlimited growth. Friedman rephrases it. He says that the power of the individual expression is important, as it will thus become a random composition, and the city will again become what it always was, a theater of daily life. At that time, the appeal of the project is quite clear. The world population was growing and urbanizing, cities were giving way to sprawl, drastically demolishing the countryside. Critical observer of his time, Friedman wrote, now I have to jump and I come back. He wrote, 3 billion people inhabit the earth today. We are at 7.4 million at the moment. 3 billion people inhabit the earth today. This population, increasingly over time, represents an area density of 80 inhabitants per kilometer of inhabited area, equal to the average density of mainland France. To count up to 3 billion, day and night, would take 45 years, Jonas Friedman says. To build a car for each of these 3 billion individuals would take the combined global automobile industry, 300 years. If a car is a luxury, however, housing is a necessity. How long would it take to build a shelter for each one of these 3 billion individuals? In response, I go back, Friedman theorized an intensified city, a way to keep urban life dense and contextual, modernist, but not tabula rasa. And I really like these drawings are in the Fondation pour l'Architecture Le Frac à Orléans. And they're really beautiful as they show the different levels of his spatial city, with the ground floor much more related to agriculture, transport, and the community, and with the different elements on top. These show how he kind of structures the city and how he develops it in different layers. And then, of course, these images are the ones that you might know. are the images where he shows his spatial city on top of an existing city, an existing landscape and existing buildings. The structures of Friedman introduce a kind of merger between countryside and the city. It makes unavailable sites, areas where building is not possible or permitted, expanses of water or marshal land, farmland, areas that have been already built upon, accessible. And it is also very much a plan of its time, in which the modernist street in the sky turned into extended cities in the sky. A project Friedman kept feasible, but I use brackets, by fitting each plan to a very specific context, firing off proposals to city governments across the world. During these same years, the Dutch artist Constant Nieuwenhuis surprises the international architectural community. Fuck, Peter Cook recalls saying to Michael Webb, "This is good." Cook and Webb gone to hear Constant present his New Babylon project at the Institute of Contemporary Arts, the ICA in London, in November 1963. Michael Webb and Peter Cook, as members of the London-based architectural collective Archigram, were used to the idea that they were radical, and that they were the far most radical around. Now, Webb and Cook were faced with slides of the exotic Dutch artist Constant Nieuwenhuis, which you see here in his workspace. Constant's career began immediately after the Second World War, so there's a kind of similarity, an important one, with Friedman, when he was a member of the experimental Cobra group, which recasted painting in new, rebellious, aggressive, and liberating molds. However, the painter Constant quickly set himself aside from the other members of Cobra because he saw a very distinctive way of making his work subservient to his sense of social commitment. This social impact is important. He aimed to develop a visual idiom which had the potential to influence and shape his new post-war world. Around 1955, he was actually preaching the death of the painting, which he saw as a totally outdated medium, and was looking for other ways to visualize his quest for total freedom. That's why the models, and you will see more of them, are very important in the work of Constant. The result of all that was a project on which he worked from 1956 to 1974, which is called New Babylon, and which took an invariable amount of different results. Maquettes, drawings, oil paintings, watercolors, but also pamphlets, manifestos, interviews, films, and photographs. Constant's aim was to communicate his ideas to a broad public and achieve a radical new form of creativity. The start of New Babylon can be retraced to a very particular moment in the summer of 1956, when the Danish artist Asger Jorn invites Constant to come to Alba, a small village in Piemonte, Italy, to speak at the Industry of Fine Arts Congress. And we see them here together at the Congress. After the Congress, Constant prolongs his stay in Alba as he invited by the Italian painter Giuseppe Pino Galizio, who had worked as an advocate and political representative of the gypsy population that visited Alba at that time. The gypsies had been camping under the roof of the town's livestock market in Alba, where they, and I quote, "They lit fires, hung their tents from the pillars to protect themselves, and improvised shelters with the aid of boxes and planks left by the traders." However, the town council had determined that the gypsies did not clean up sufficiently and had to be banned from Alba's public space. It was Pino Galizio who gave them some land on his property along the river Tamaro, which we can see here on the left, and we see Galizio standing with them in their camp. In December that same year, Constant visits the gypsy camp and notices the inhumane circumstances of their settlement. In his descriptions, he notes also the paradox of mass camping. The gypsies indeed were mobilizing the city and reconstituting the same city or their same habitat elsewhere. So they were overriding spatial differences of city to country and accommodating the idea of place through activities of leisure, recreation, and camping. It's the idea of the activity that becoming more important than the actual making of the space. Early in 1957, so a couple of months after he returned to Amsterdam, Constant develops the model for a gypsy camp, which we can see here. A model which became the basis for the subsequent models of New Babylon. Constant's project consisted of not imposing a sedentary way of life upon itinerant people, but rather the opposite, taking their itinerant way and proposing it as a model for everyone else, a new way to inhabit the world. The project included movable dividing walls that could be manipulated by the nomadic inhabitants, and its overall design resembled more like a tent-like structure, but it included also the promise of a new form of living, a new form of human settlement. Constant says, that was the day I conceived the scheme for a permanent encampment for the gypsies of Elba, and that project is the origin of the series of maquettes of New Babylon. New Babylon, where, under one roof, with the aid of movable elements, a shared residence is built. A temporary, constantly remodeled living area, a camp for nomads on a planetary scale. Publishing these ideas to their theoretical limit, he proposes a camping milieu at a global scale, an infinite extensible matrix, temporary in its flexibility rather than in its placement. New Babylon proposes an ideal worldwide city in which rapid changes is a key assumption of the life that can be lived there. And of course, you all have seen these very nice collages that are in the Gemeentemuseum in Den Haag, where he shows how his city, how his expandable matrix city can be, and we recall what Friedman has done with the spatial city, can be implemented above the existing cities. The city of New Babylon is designed to be flexible. It's building as a network of structures supported on pillars and extending all over Europe. The fabric of the city is to be divided in various multi-story sectors within which residents will move around on foot or take lifts between the different floors. And here you can see a drawing which shows more the verticality of it. Climate, light, and air are all artificially controlled. Cars, buses, and freight vehicles pass underneath the buildings, and the roofs provide space for pedestrian areas, landscaped walkways, and airport runs. Again, resembling a bit Friedman's proposal, with a very limited surface touching the ground, in order so that the ground can continue supporting what it already has, agriculture, city, or infrastructure. Architecture would be, in the eyes of Constant, a global network of sectors supported by pillars, common open spaces in which life would be subject to constant change. Movable architectural components, such as walls, floors, stairs, bridges, and ladders, would allow the New Babylonians to continually build new environments and create new routes. Individuality would be banished. In 1966, so 12 years later after he started his project, Constant Nieuwenhuis had an interview with Rem Koolhaas and Betty van Garrel, which I think framed very well what he saw as a kind of important idea of his city in a global scale. And I just quote one little phrase. He says, "I have abandoned the idea of the city as a kind of knot, a kind of round shape marked on the map like a red blot." And we all know these blots. "I am thinking about a very open structure, entirely coherent, so that you can travel through it and with all the fragments of the landscape integrated within the same structure." Okay, if all this has seemed a little bit vague or theoretical or utopian or naive, you might wonder what can we do with it? What can we do with it today? What can we do with it during the masterclass? What is left if architecture is stripped of its authority? I have to say this first. Today, Constant and Friedman benefit from a renewed interest. Until the end of September, a very large exhibition is presented in Den Haag, a very, very beautiful one, with new maquettes that have not been shown yet to the public. And Jonas Friedman, of course, received a very large exhibition at the EPFL in Lausanne in 2012 with important books published on his work. So their work is equally rediscovered by the public, but also by researchers, by architects, and by architectural students. But all too often, the drawings, the models, and the plans, so exactly the same things that I have shown you today, are taken at face value. The numerous blogs and websites that republish the projects today do not go beyond the aesthetic, do not go beyond the aesthetic of the drawing and of the model. And hell, why should they? These drawings are beautiful, they are visionary, they are powerful. But, and that's what I want to do in this very last part, the projects are more than drawings. They are drawings that maybe are not a concrete and a measured solution, but they are a kind of manifesto, a kind of statement, a kind of proposal, and we should try to see them as that. So what I try to do now is that I have 3 different ways of looking to hold the material that I have shown you today. How can we interpret them in the light of today's challenges? Both projects propose, and that's the first one, sorry, I have to go here. The first one, propose a new kind of social system. The 1950s and the 1960s were, of course, a time of major change. Automated manufacturing processes were being introduced, and the standard of living was rising. The growth in road and air transport was making it easier for people to travel farther, and to travel faster. A new balance between work and leisure was making it easier for people to enjoy their free time. In parallel, Europe was facing an important challenge, as it was, of course, feeling the urgent need to build upon the ruins of its own history after the World War a new and a better world. Both Constant and Friedman propose a new system of ownership. In the spatial city, ownership is no longer related to the ground. The land underneath the city is used for agriculture and a network of roads, power supply, and sewerage. Ownership is limited to the adaptable and the removable infill. The private unit one has, and one can develop within the larger grid. In New Babylon, and these are some models of New Babylon, property no longer exists neither. Everyone is able to make free use of the land and the available goods. The new Babylonians wander around like nomads through a completely artificial, organized world. As such, both projects propose a new social space, a space where harmony among men and women is to be found in their living environment. Constant called his city in the 1960s the Wide World Web, and Jonas Friedman later worked on a project called Continent City Europe. Europe, he suggested, could be one gigantic city, composed of 180 villages or neighborhoods and perforated by hinterland. Of course, he was laughed out at that time, but for a little time at least, before the recent flare-up of nationalism and anti-migrant hysteria, something like this was nearly achieved. Second point, a new individual. Because of course, as industrialization has taken over the production of man, New Babylon is based on the idea of an alternative, fully automated society in which human labor has become completely unnecessary. This means that people are free to devote themselves entirely to the development of creative ideas. Residents of New Babylon form a new race. Constant draw them in this manner. He called them the Homo Ludens, or the man at play, after the concept of the Dutch philosopher Johan Huizinga. Man would have unlimited freedom to decide the ever-changing appearance of his own surroundings. And I must say, I'm not playing this, but the Pokemon kind of hysteria kind of makes me think that maybe we are reaching the Homo Ludens after all. The spatial city is populated by a similar human, although Friedman never called him a playing man. He thought of a person able to devote his entire life to his own creative development. The idea of the empowerment that we have been hearing this morning, I thought is maybe an interesting idea on which we can debate later on. In New Babylon and in La Ville Spatiale, the spatial city, machines and automatization take over work and labor. People play. With the exploitation of labor ended, all social inequalities, all social hierarchies have gone. And the third point, of course, is this question: is there a new form of architecture? I have to admit that when I first told some of my friends that I wanted to do a talk on architecture and migration, or architecture and the problem of refugees, they started sending me pictures of tents and modular structures and things in cardboard, and all of a sudden I realized, also with what I've been telling you today, that of course we can focus only on the problem of the migrants, of the migration, of the refugees, but we can also, and that's what I try to do without explicitly saying it, try to figure out a new system in which we can all live, and don't have a distinction between migrant citizens and non-migrant citizens. So, a new form of architecture. What kind of architecture for this new social system? New Babylon and the spatial city, and these are plans from New Babylon, took the logic of nomadism and a horizontal world to its extreme. The floating plains of New Babylon do not have walls. They do not form any walls. And so if the representation of the project, and we can see it very clearly here, is unambiguously architectural, New Babylon bears very little trace of how architecture is generally understood. There are no doors, no facades, no windows. There is no detailing, no plumbing, or no furniture. Constant represents the promise of architecture rather than its mechanism. The ultimate city of the near future is primarily defined by what it is not. One long city spreading over the world, no lines divide inside and outside, night and day, private or public. The structure has no national borders, no property, no family, no institution, no church, no corporation, no law, no police, and no state. There is no housing or workplaces, just an infinite interior without domesticity. Architecture, purely and only as structure. To conclude, these are just some of the images in the exhibition in Den Haag, where they rebuild the model of Constant, where you can, as a visitor, go in, and you can really feel his idea of play within the new structure. To conclude, this is my final image. Both Constant and Friedman proposed visionary projects for a world in which no one would be considered ordinary or strange. Spaces offering shelter and opportunity to people without imposing themselves. Spaces genuinely open to the stranger, embracing the risk of the other. According to them, real generosity of a space does not lie in the possibility to occupy, but in its possible transformation. They stripped architecture of its authority. They stripped architecture of its ornament. They stripped architecture of its fundamental elements. The result was barely nothing, but, and to paraphrase Rem Koolhaas, where there is nothing left, everything becomes possible. Thank you.